Welcome to another episode of my podcast, We Need Each Other. It proves itself to be truer and truer and truer every day. We need each other. We do not live here in isolation. And so today I have a special guest who is Reverend Jason Daveon Mitchell. He is a 2020 graduate in the inaugural class of the Michael B. Beckwith School of Ministry. As a staff member of Agape International Spiritual Center, Reverend Jason manages Agape's prayer ministry and supports the practitioner corps. In addition to these roles, he serves as the director for Agape's Sacred Service Ministry. For more than 8 years, Reverend Jason has facilitated our daily prayer call, a morning devotional call where people from around the world gather in prayer, affirming truth. Whether he's serving in the community with our youth, facilitating workshops, providing spiritual counseling, advising business leaders, or simply being a student of truth, Reverend Jason is constantly leading through service. His utmost desire is that all of humanity awaken to the truth of our divinity and master walking this journey as love incarnate. Welcome, Reverend Jason.
Oh, thank you so much, Francesca James. It's good to be here. It's good to be in the space. I love the title of your podcast, We Need Each Other, because it's a statement of truth.
Yes, it is a statement of truth. I have, just from your bio, I have a couple of questions for those who do not know. Who is Michael B. Bernard Beckwith?
Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith is the founder and spiritual director of the Agape International Spiritual Center. He is a metaphysical teacher, a mystic, a friend, a counselor, and he has been the founder of that global community, which we call Agape International Spiritual Center, for almost 35 years now.
I already knew the answer to that question because I'm a founding member of Agape, but we had to clarify that for people who go, well,
absolutely, let the
who's
people
Michael
know.
Beckwith, and what is Agape International Spiritual Center? So, and what is a practitioner? You said something about, I don't know, the practitioner corps. What is the practitioner corps?
So, as a part of Agape as a spiritual community, the practitioners are the ecclesiastical arm of the community. So what that looks like is in other spiritual communities and centers, they might have deacons, they might have the nurses, they might have different bodies that are charged with upholding the principles of the community. Within Agape, a practitioner, an Agape licensed spiritual practitioner, is one who's made a commitment to practice the presence of God in their earthly walk and how they work within the community and in their lives. And in particular, they are the praying arm of the community. So their first call is to be in prayer as the community comes to them, as they see disturbances, as they see things that need to be addressed, as they see things that they want to do and be energized, or people come to them with questions. Practitioners' first call is to pray, and we serve in the community. So the Agape Practitioner Corps is also the largest service arm of the community. While I may be the director of the Sacred Service Ministry and we have hundreds of volunteers, the hours that the practitioners put in service to the community and service to classes and facilitating classes is incredibly substantial.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I had him explain that because I am a practitioner since 1991. But again, the listening audience, thanks. The listening audience does not necessarily understand that terminology, and so it's important to put that out there. And the truth of prayer is just like where you automatically go. I pass by a car accident, I start praying. I see a homeless person, I start praying. I see whatever, I start praying. I hear someone say something that I know daggers are going to be thrown at them about what they say, I start praying. It's just that.
So you were praying for me on Sunday then.
I was praying for you on Sunday.
But you know what that is for me? Anytime I see or I sense something that doesn't align with the truth, oh, it's my call to do the work in my consciousness to bring that into truth.
Yes. If people understood that, Jason, say that again. Make it plain so they get what you just said.
So all the times where I see something wrong, something bad, that I'm worried about something happening to someone that would be outside of their destiny. And in my position as a viewer, my destiny for them would be good. would be for
Right.
something good to happen to them. So
Yes.
if anytime I'm in an observational position where I see some crisis or situation or disturbance that would have me think that a person is outside of good, like just
Mm-hmm.
outside of good, it's
Mm-hmm.
my calling to see that and to bring it into my consciousness, speak and declare the truth that I know about life, that I know about that person, regardless of what they do, regardless of
Mm-hmm.
what they know. They don't need to know nothing about my prayers because it's
Right.
done within my consciousness.
It's done within our consciousness. That's what they teach us as practitioners. The shift is done within our consciousness when we're praying for people. And that's what's available to other people about their own lives. The shift is within your consciousness. What are you focused on? What are you vibrating with? What are you believing in? Shift it. Bring it
Absolutely, I
into,
love it.
bring it, surround it in truth.
Hmm.
Because the truth is, God is at the helm and guiding and directing everything all the time. And
Hmm.
what we
And
may not
everybody else is.
understand,
Hmm.
go ahead.
Everybody else is trying to get on the little dinghies and the lifeboats and think that they can go in any other direction, and they should
Right.
just stay on the ship.
Right. Just stay on the ship. Just stay right here on the ship. It's safe here. So let's go back. Who is Jason Daveon Mitchell before the whole Reverend Jason situation here? And you were associated with Agape. Where'd you grow up? What's your childhood like? Who are you?
Uh, I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I was
Oh,
born in Los Angeles over at Cedars.
uh
And
huh.
then from age 6, I moved with my family to Pasadena, California. I am, as I said on Sunday, the son of a rock star. My mother is Darlene Love. So she's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, is most well known for being a part of the documentary 20 Feet from Stardom. But
Mm.
as I told somebody else who asked me about her, I was like, I just call her mom.
Yeah.
And my father was the former chief of police for the Los Angeles Unified School District. So at the time, it was the largest school police department in the country. So on the one hand, I was raised by an entertainer. On the other hand, I was raised by a law enforcement executive. And when they divorced, I was actually one of those rare, you don't hear about it as much, children who was raised by their father. So my father got
Mm-hmm.
full custody and he raised me and took care of me even till he took his last breath in 2014. My father was still parenting me and guiding me,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been beautiful. I'm a graduate of Florida A&M University, a very proud alum of a historically
Mm-hmm.
black college down there in
Yes.
Tallahassee, Florida, the highest of seven
Mm-hmm.
hills. So I am a product of the HBCU system.
Me too.
Um, and I've been a part of, in some aspects, service for my whole life. When I was a student at John Muir, I was a part of a small organization, a small group of young people called the Pasadena Youth Foundation, where they just started looking and realizing that they knew youth needed to be involved in the community from the government city perspective. So there was a small
Mm-hmm.
group of us that advised mayoral councils and different schools about different projects that could happen on campus, campuses within Pasadena Unified School District. And then when I went to college, I became a member of a service organization, also known as Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated,
You're a
and as a part
Kalpa.
of, I am.
I married one of you. Divorced him quickly. Go ahead. I'm an
Lots of
AKA.
journeys. There's lots of journeys out there.
Yes, there
So
are.
many, so many. Somebody's probably marrying a Kappa and divorcing a Kappa on this Saturday
Right,
too. So
right,
who
yeah,
knows?
right now. Exactly.
And so as a part of that organization, I was the historian. So I was very much a part of organizing outreach projects for our organization, as well as keeping us engaged with making an impact in the city. So then, even coming out of those institutions, I didn't realize it till I look back, but I've
Mhm.
always been involved in service. In 1997, when I moved back to Los Angeles, I became very involved in my uncle's church, Word Center Church of Los Angeles, traditional Christian, charismatic faith. They did their training at Rhema Bible Training Center, so everything about traditional Christian faith teaching is what I was in at the time. My grandfather passed away when I was 6, but he was a bishop in the Apostolic Church, and he
Mm.
established a large community here in Los Angeles and was one of those ministers at that time that was well known, well renowned. And my family's lineage on my mother's side is pastors and teachers. So two of my uncles are pastors, and both of them and their families have held down some form of that church ever since. So even though it's changed names, even though it's changed congregations and locations, that community that my grandfather started still exists. So spirituality, teaching, uh, Jesus was very much a part of my life. But when I was raised with my dad, I wasn't as involved with the church. So when I came back from college, I got involved with my uncle, and probably from 1997 till 2003, I was there every time the church opened, every time the church closed, cleaning the building, making sure everything happened, very much involved. And then in 2001, I got married, and in 2004, I got separated and divorced. And
I
that
didn't
was
know you had ever been married.
most people who haven't had long conversations with me where the relationships come up and that have known me since I've gotten to Agape don't know that aspect of my
How
life.
long were you married?
We're married for 3 years, so separated at 3 years, and then in California it takes a while to get a divorce. So, but on paper we were married for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know that saying, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams." Your ancestors are proud of you.
I think that my grandfather, you know how when people go into their elders' libraries after
Mm-hmm.
they've passed and they start
Mm-hmm.
finding texts and books, that they
Mm-hmm.
were teaching one thing out to the community, but they were reading about everything.
Mm-hmm.
One of my cousins told me that there were like metaphysical books in my grandfather's library.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the lineage of a lot of our African American traditions, there's metaphysics all throughout, but a lot of it is put into the prison. It's locked up in the
Mm-hmm.
and in the religion and the ideology that they were given from the European. And so
Yes.
but they still found a way. That's why the charismatic church with the huffing and the puffing and the jumping and the shouting and the sweating for hours resembles more of the African spirituality than it does European religious Christian tradition. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather's church. They played the drums into the ground. They jumped up and down. They sweat. It was a Holy Ghost. You plead, you kneel on the ground and you chant. Basically, you chant
Mm-hmm.
until you get a higher consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
which in their teaching was the Holy Spirit came through, where you spoke in
Right.
tongues.
Mm-hmm.
But that's chanting. That's a devotional exercise that the Eastern religions articulate in a different way. So
Right.
that's, when I look at it from that light, I definitely see my grandfather and the elders of my family who I never knew
Mm-hmm.
behind me, kind of just keep going, just keep going.
Yes.
You'll get
Yes.
there, and it's
Yes.
magnificent.
Yes. Yes. That's beautiful. Explain higher consciousness. What does that mean?
So, it's funny. I had a session with a client just the other day, and we were talking about um, the idea of what we choose, and the aspects of the human being that are functioning without choice, right? So consciousness is the idea and the part of us that's active, that's actively choosing, that's actively doing, that's actively engaged. Higher consciousness, and then just the levels of consciousness, higher consciousness, unconscious or subconscious, and superconscious, are these aspects of us that continue to function whether we realize it or not. So our subconscious is constantly actually recording every experience, every encounter, everything it sees, everything it knows. It's how we can, from our conscious mind, not remember something for one moment, but then 7 hours later, 7 days later, that thing just rises up in our awareness because we
Mm-hmm.
become conscious of it. But it was
Mm-hmm.
always there. Nobody
It's
said
always
anything.
there.
The
Right.
lyrics to a song that we haven't sang in 20 years, but
Mm-hmm.
is in our subconscious. But
Mm-hmm.
when we start talking about, like, what was that song? As soon as it comes on, now we know all the
Mm-hmm.
words because it's
Right.
in our subconsciousness. So when
Mm-hmm.
people are talk about the things that drive them, but they don't understand, it's because
Mm-hmm.
there's a subconscious programming. There's
Mm-hmm.
basically the grooves on a record is your subconsciousness, and when you put the needle on it, then that's consciousness, right? The grooves were
Mm-hmm.
always there,
Oh, I
but you
love
got to
that's
put
a
the
great
needle on it,
analogy.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So like all the
Great
things that we're
analogy.
doing us having this conversation is a conscious
Mm-hmm.
endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in our subconscious are all the other conversations we've ever had with any other human being, anything we've ever watched on TV, any song that we've ever listened to, any recipe we've ever read. And
Mm-hmm.
that's in our subconscious. And what we don't realize is how often we are functioning from conscious, subconscious, or superconscious. And the
Yes. What's super
superconscious is that
conscious? Mm-hmm.
creative aspect of us
Mm-hmm.
where we're downloading, where we're tapping into a higher thing that's beyond our initiated thought because we've set aside our conscious mind to be available to down.
I think the majority of people don't understand this. They've never been taught such a thing, and they don't understand it. Therefore, they live life unconsciously. They live life
Absolutely.
unconsciously without the realization that things can shift, that they can have different experiences. And you talked about higher consciousness, higher power, and systemic racism. How do those two work together?
You know, the systems that we look at in our world that run things, we have to recognize that they're man made structures. Not a single thing that functions in our society was not done with intent, right? So one of the conversations that I've had with people many times is when you look at the Constitution of the United States, they were very clear about who they decided was created equal.
Mm-hmm.
The saying it's all men are created equal. Not all human beings.
No.
So certainly you were left out
Right.
because you're not a man. So
Right.
anyone who they do not define as a man, and then they let it continue to go. And so when you start looking at systemic racism, there have been centuries of laws that were created to disenfranchise and marginalize. So we can't even argue it. It's not somebody's imagination. It's not something that someone can pretend didn't exist. So when you look at you could get certain jobs, you couldn't get certain jobs. You could buy a house in a certain neighborhood, you couldn't buy a house in a certain neighborhood. And just because the laws have changed doesn't mean that the entire population of people that supported those laws, believed in those laws, believe something different now.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that it has enacted itself in other ways, and it continues to be systemic, even though it is not codified in the laws, is that the people sit in positions of power and decision making, right? So they're the
Mm-hmm.
ones who decide who gets a contract, who doesn't get a contract. They decide who joins the union, who doesn't join the union. They decide who gets a second interview and who doesn't get a second interview. They decide who gets a first interview by the names
Right.
on the
Yes.
applications. So there are all of these structures, and many people, unfortunately, don't see their own consciousness, right? So people who have studied consciousness, their own mind is
Mm-hmm.
a sliver of the
Mm-hmm.
human population. Very few people are interested in self-awareness because that means you got to deal with your own stuff. You got to deal with
That's
your own
right.
choices. You got to
That's
deal
right.
with the aspects of you that are ugly, but they're not you. That's the
Right.
trick, right? Like
Uh-huh.
the horrible part of me that treated a person unwell, that disrespected somebody, that did violence to someone who was innocent is not really me. But I
You're the
have to
truth.
take responsibility
Mm-hmm.
for it. Like I know I'm all over the place, but
No,
just
this is good.
to close out the question around systemic racism, so you see all of these systems and structures, right? And some of the ones I described were related to economics. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
ones are related to social hierarchies, who could and could not get married, what it took to vote, like, just the right to vote. So all of these structures are based and decided primarily by white men, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was never all white men because there were plenty of white men that were abolitionists. Black
Yeah.
people don't get free in America without white men.
Mm-hmm.
It's this dichotomy, this thing it seems very polarizing, but we're unable to completely dismiss them, just like they're unable to completely dismiss us. And
Mm-hmm.
so we can't become like them wholly because there's always been somebody that looked like them helping us out. Now, when
Mm.
you look at the history of these things and you look at the changes and then you look at spirituality, God has always been. And the one thing that's happened from generation to generation in humanity is we've evolved. There's less violence and less war in the world today than at any time in human history. It's hard to tell because we have more information about every single act.
Right.
If you had all the information about all the acts of war and violence that were happening in 1887, you wouldn't be able to talk about anything else. When I was
important fact to understand. That's important to understand.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My brother introduced me to a book a long time ago that was a really tough read, and it was it was basically the newspaper articles for a certain period of time, and it was 100 years of lynching, and all it was report after report after report, the actual news stories for 100 years of the lynchings of black people in America. And you hear these stories and you hear the violence, and it still doesn't compare to what the violence that we see today, because you see those old school pictures of people who have lynched a body and they're posing for a picture with their thumbs up and their smiles and their glee
and their children.
Oh, absolutely. You know, before the probably we really understood child psychology, people didn't treat children that different. There wasn't a question of whether or not the children should be sitting next to, if a child lived on a farm, whether they should sit next to their father who was the farmer as he cut the chicken's neck. That wasn't a pet. We understood those dynamics in those spaces back then. But we recognize that we want children to be treated a little differently, and so they have different experiences. So all of that, and then so how does that relate to God? Well, God is that higher aspect of all of us that's seeking to be better, to be good, and recognizes inequality, that recognizes that there's something wrong with treating another human being like an animal. That there were so many Christians at the same time in the 1800s that believed in slavery and also were abolitionists. They read from the same book, and one person read the book and said, I should not allow other human beings to be enslaved. And the other people read from the book that said, well, this has always happened and we can make money off these folks and it's prosperity and we should do it. But over time, what we continue to witness is major events and disruptions in our society that wake us up. We live in I was reading the reading for our spiritual community that's going to be read tomorrow. And it's from Greg Braden's book. I can't remember the title right now. And he quotes a line that talks about we live in a living universe, right?
What kind of universe?
A living universe. It's alive, right? The universe is alive. And things that are alive, when you look at them, they grow, they expand, they transform, they do all of that. And that's what we're meant to do, right? And so society has continued to grow, but there are humans that try to oppress and suppress what society is trying to do. So how do they do that? They create the laws that suppress and oppress and change the patterns that are old and dying so they can try to preserve the world that they've known. Spirituality is constantly propelling us forward, expanding our idea of what it means to be male, female, what sex is, what relationship is, what community is. All of that is evolving. And spirituality cannot align with something that is not true, right? So I'll always get back to truth with a capital T. And that truth with a capital T is looking at as a pronoun as something that is in existence, right? Not an opinion, not a preference, not a like or a dislike. And the truth that we see in our world is that the inequality, oppression, suppression, the denial of the humanity of other human beings is out of integrity with life, with aliveness. And because it's out of integrity with aliveness, there are going to be people that try to tear it apart, requalify it, recycle it, change it into something that actually works for everyone.
Yes. Something that works for everyone. There you have it. So, Jason, Reverend Jason, I know him as Jason. Okay. But Reverend Jason, I want to honor you here. I saw you did a talk at Agape on Sunday. It was called Liars, Tyrants, and Prayers. What am I? Sound familiar, y'all? Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. But liars, tyrants, and prayers. What am I? Where did that title come from?
So
Downloaded?
all of my
They
titles come
download.
from spirit.
That's
Like,
right.
because half the time when I get it, I'm like, okay,
Wait, what?
now what are you going to talk about? Because
Yeah.
I don't know what this means yet.
I know what you're talking. I know exactly what you mean when you say that.
And one of my teachers in ministerial school, Reverend Joanne would say this, Reverend Joanne Coleman, Reverend Michael Bernard Beckman will say this. And they always talk about the speaker, the teacher gets the first fruit. So we're the one that we receive the message, we get to chew on it, we get to nurture it, and then it's our calling to serve it, right? So I was just getting worked on for the week. Once I knew I was talking, I would turn within and be like, okay, it's time to activate because there's something that's seeking to be made known through me. And I certainly wasn't looking to have that conversation. That wasn't even forefront of my mind. There wasn't anything that would have told me when Reverend Michael called me that I would be speaking soon. There was nothing that would have told me that I need to be preparing this talk.
Right.
So that talk was fresh, asked for that day and that time. And so going into as a matter of fact, one of the last nuggets that was spoken came to me as I got in the bed Saturday night. So like 5 minutes after I got in the bed, I had to jump out, run to the other room and grab my journal, which should have been sitting next to me anyway, and write it down so that I could get all of that in. So I had to go get my journal and spend some time with it and write that down. And then the next morning in my prayer and meditation in the morning, all of it flushed itself out. So, I mean, it was a great day. It was incredible.
I know that experience. And so to the audience, when Reverend Jason or when I talk about downloading, that's what he's talking about. You open up and then it just comes in.
You know, it's funny because I'm sure I'd imagine the ancients as they looked to nature and they saw God and so that they understood more of it. So much of what's happened with technology, I feel like has given us language like download, right? Like super highway.
Yes.
To describe something that's bigger than we could process, right? Absolutely. So the computer technology folks created processors and processing speed and all that kind of stuff. Now we're downloading because we have good language. We have a new word that more represents what it's like to catch a message from spirit. But now we kind of recognize that terminology a little better.
That's true. So what were you talking about when you were talking about liars and tyrants and prayers?
So the short version of it is this, that we've all been lied to. But when we talk about liars, I don't want us to hold an idea that a person knew what they were doing, even if they did it on purpose. You know, Jesus, one of the last saying of Jesus is, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. It's not that they didn't do it on purpose. They still don't know what they're doing, right? So a liar, the realization that came to me is one that holds a limited idea about reality. And in holding that limited idea about reality, they lie. So some of their lies are that there's not enough to go around. Some of their lies is that you have to do all these favors in order to get your blessing. Some of the lies that they tell is that the systems will always be corrupt because the only way to get ahead is to cheat. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. There are all of these little ideas that our world promotes. And unfortunately, they're antithetical. They just are completely opposite to an idea of living in a benevolent universe, one that is constantly giving, constantly gracious, constantly pouring out to us. And because we've been lied to by the people closest to us, because they didn't know any better, by strangers, and the systems and the structures are constantly sending messages to us that are lies, because they're all rooted into a limited idea about reality.
Mm-hmm.
And then I talked about the tyrants. And I used the word tyrant. It became really clear that because of the meaning behind tyrant, I don't think is as well known as the popularity of the usage of the word.
Mm-hmm.
And so a tyrant, in a lot of cases, they think of like big bad villains, and they think of stereotypical portrayals of some big bad guy or gal in a film. But a tyrant is a little more insidious and simple than that. A tyrant is one who is a usurper of power, one who takes away the power, a usurper of specifically sovereignty. A tyrant is one who takes away our sovereignty, one who takes away our ability to actually choose. I didn't say this on Sunday, but one of Reverend Michael's teachings is choice is a product of awareness. You can only make choices about things that you are aware of. Where the systems and structures in our world are constantly hiding things from us. They're constantly bloviating and hiding things behind the lies and the red tape and all of these different systems, and saying it'll take too long to change things. But that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Things change in the moment we choose, but we don't recognize our power because we've been lied to, because the tyrants, the systems,
Yes.
and the structures in our world are the way that I utilize tyrants, because we think of it as people. But I think that in particularly the systems and structures that support white supremacy, the systems and structures that support specifically poverty, like a continuous poverty, are tyrannical. So in the talk on Sunday, I mentioned that capitalism is a tyrant, specifically the way capitalism is functioning in our society. So what did I mean by that? Well, what kind of sense does it mean that in a world that's driven an economic system of entrepreneurship, of getting educations and things like that, that you have to be forced to pay a minimum wage? Well,
Mm-hmm.
and then that the minimum wage that you're forced to pay as an entrepreneur, as a corporation, as an employee, doesn't provide for the standard of living, the basic standard of living in the country. And even the goal that California has set, $15 an hour,
Right.
certainly doesn't provide for the basic cost of living of a person who works full-time, 40, even 50 hours a week at $15 an hour in
Right.
most places in the state. So then what is the effect on the citizens of that type of system? Well, it's oppression. It's more poverty. It's people making decisions because they feel desperate. The society does not drive hope and opportunity and a belief that I can be or do or have anything that I really want, because I'm the third of a generation that's been raised in poverty, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm the third of a generation that's coming out of situations for where there were systems and laws like Jim Crow. Jim Crow is a part of capitalism. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to understand that the economic system as it currently is has always been something that oppressed and suppressed human beings, particularly people with black bodies, brown bodies,
Mm-hmm.
particularly people from other countries that did not fit into that European model of white citizen, specifically male, that came over here. Because women couldn't even own land
No.
during part of this capitalist system in America. So that was one of the tyrants. I also mentioned, I use that one as a big example, but I also mentioned all the racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, all of our phobias, any system that makes another, right? Anyone that says you're this thing that's an other than I am, and I don't like you, and I want to treat you different because you're not what I am. All of those things are tyrants. And we went from liars to tyrants to prayers, because I challenged people in our community that if they did not have the ability to speak the word of truth for their own lives, there's a problem. That
Mm-hmm.
each and every one of us need to have the power and the authority of our voice. Well, that is our sovereignty. We are
Mm-hmm.
sovereign beings. We are divine emanations of the Most High. It doesn't matter what language you use, Allah, Jehovah, Great Spirit, Holy One, intelligence, universe. There is that something underneath it all that shows you that these accidents and happenstance are divinely ordained, even maybe especially the ones you did not want to go through, you did not want to experience, because they all grant us the opportunity to move beyond our known life. That's not always comfortable. That's not always what we would have chosen. And so that can be really challenging. And so we finished it off with this idea of who am I, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the who am I requires us to do the work. If I've been lied to, and there's someone who's usurped my power and taken my own sovereignty away from me, then I need to disavow myself, which would have been a really good word to use Sunday. I didn't use that word. But we need to disavow ourselves of all of the identities that we currently have, because the idea that we have about those identities right now are also limited ideas about reality. The one that I centered in most was mother. So much of the idea of what it means to be a mother, and I know you're a mother, has been sacrificial. So much of the idea of a mother for many people has been, you get a gold star for giving up your entire life for your children. So much of these ideas about what it means to be a mother means that you don't get to have a fulfilled sex life, that you don't get to have a fulfilled life of creativity to reach your dreams, that you're supposed to set aside all that you are for your offspring. And the idea about what it means to be a father doesn't look anything like that. There are many fathers that do that. There are many fathers that set aside all of their dreams and all their careers and take care of their babies. But that's not the idea that our society has promoted about fathers. So we just need to set down the idea about mother, what it means to be mother, what it means to be black, what it means to be gay, what it means to be trans, what any of these identities, what it means to be a foreigner, what it means to be American. We need to set them all down, take a breath, allow ourselves to be in that space of nothingness. And then as we pick up anything, we requalify it, almost anoint it with the holy oil of our consciousness, and realize, well, what's the divine idea of mother? What's the divine gift in being gay? What's the divine gift in being African American? What's the divine gift of being Brazilian? What's the divine gift of being Indian? What's the divine gift of being Native American? What is the divine word, anointing, love, uniqueness of all of these different aspects? Because they exist. It's not like we made them up. They exist. And because they exist, they're worth picking up again without the limited ideas about reality, with our spiritual authority.
That's absolutely, that's just beautiful. You know, I've been teaching a class. I've been teaching a class to white people to help them to understand the subconscious part of themselves that's been put in that they think is not there, that comes out and people of color see, feel, hear it. And the people who take the class really get it, and they're wonderful. I've taught a class to black people called Crowned about just what you're talking about. Who are you? Let's go inside and know your divinity, know the truth of who you are. When you connect with that and disconnect with the history, disconnect with what's been told to you about yourself, which you know from here you've always known is not true. Connect with this.
Yes.
And breathe that out into the world. Live from that. That's when you see life change. Your individual life, the lives of the people around you. It buoys everybody up. You see this shift, this thing that happens, but it starts, as you said in the beginning, it starts with you. It starts with the individual. It's an individual, case-by-case situation that it's important for us to, if we want to be better, not do better. be better, then we take that on for ourselves and realize what is truth with a capital T, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I did see in the chat, most people were really in alignment with what you were saying. There were some people, and I call it white fragility, that weren't getting it and didn't want to hear it. And what, what do you say about that?
You know, I love that because I sensed the next thing that was seeking to be said through me was most white folks don't know us. So when you look at just the very basics, when you look at the distribution of social structures, when you look at the distribution of population, and you look at where black people just don't live, there are white people who do not cross our paths on a regular basis, but they have a belief about us.
Mm-hmm.
They believe we're this, they believe us that. They've never listened to our music, whether it's hip hop or R&B or jazz. They've never really witnessed, observed actually us. So remember we were talking about subconscious, and everything that you've ever seen, you've ever watched is in you.
Mm-hmm.
So they've seen us on TV.
Mm-hmm.
They've seen us in the news where we're horribly misrepresented.
Mm-hmm.
They've seen black people and brown people on a regular basis through all of these stereotypical lenses in their movies and their TV shows. And that's how they treat us. A
Mm-hmm.
vast majority, not most, but a vast, large swathe of them sees us based upon the things that they've learned through the TV and the media and all of their consumption. So then, if you were to meet me, or if they were to meet you, they would not have any clue of who we would. And then that's where we have to deal with microaggressions, because now we're explaining to them that we're not like those people from New Jack City. We're not like those people
Right.
from CSI. We're not like those
Mm-hmm.
people from all of these horrible scenarios that you were raised with from a
Mm-hmm.
child.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the structures and how they encounter us, it's why they need to unpack what it means to be white. Because
Mm-hmm.
white technically isn't a thing. There is nothing culturally relevant about white. I know what Spanish is. There's a whole culture around Spain. I know what Polish is. There's a whole language and art around Polish. I know what Russian is. Whole country, whole language and art. And you can hop around all of the white identifying groups culturally in Europe, and you have a culture. But what is the culture of whiteness?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't exist. And as somebody was talking about this week that I read, and they try to present whiteness as the baseline for society. And it never has been, it never will be, because before black people were made the enemy, the Italians and the Polish and all of the
That's
people who
right.
now
Yeah.
primarily
Yeah.
identify as white were fighting
Right.
each other.
Right.
Then they
That's
came
right.
together and found a new enemy, which at the time would be called the colored people and the Negroes, who we call African American now, the descendants
Mm-hmm.
of those who were brought over in the slave trade or those that migrated and were lumped into that group.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of them being fragile makes sense to me, because
Yes.
everything
Mm-hmm.
that they thought they knew, that they thought they believed, all of the lies about reality, the
Mm-hmm.
limited ideas about reality that they held as fact, were
Mm-hmm.
all fantasy. And finally, we're living in an age where, because of academic scholarship, activism, and lived experience, our children are integrating more than ever before. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a very mixed high school. There was a large white
Yes, me
population,
too.
large black, brown, and Asian, and there was no race issues on that campus. But that was unusual even then when I was growing up, because in the South, my friends that I went to college with didn't have that experience. And many of
Mm.
my friends that lived in the North didn't have that experience. When I spent my summers in New York with my mom, the kids in New York weren't having that experience because that's when the Jones Beach riots were happening. And that's when a lot of that kind of stuff was happening on the East Coast. And so as you start seeing all of these structures, I am not surprised that a person's ego
Hmm.
rises up and pushes back.
Hmm.
I actually hope it happens and I expect it because I'd rather they be aware of the fact that they're living primarily and observing me talk through their ego when I'm not
Hmm.
interested in their ego. I'm interested in them
Yes.
listening with their soul.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting, Reverend Jason, that I started asking a couple of years ago. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what ethnicity are you? I ask that of people all the time because I know I'm looking at you. I think I know what you are. So I'm going to address you as what I think you are. And then I'm telling you, 90% of the time, I don't have a clue what that person is. I'm just shocked at what I hear. But what I found was, because you said, like, many of them don't know us, many of them don't know themselves. Because when I ask white people, what is your ethnicity? The majority of the time they say, well, I'm just white. Well, that's not an ethnicity. Where is your family from? And that, well, I think that, so they don't know themselves. And that leaves them in some kind of a vulnerable, fragile state that makes
It's
them go to their
frightening.
ego. It's frightening. Yes, it's
Absolutely.
frightening.
And it's why I know I'm one that's called to lead with compassion, where I know
Hmm.
other friends of mine are called to lead with more aggression, right?
Yes,
Because I know that
yes,
that it takes a little bit of all of it, right? If
yes,
we were
yes.
tearing down a prison, we would have some people that would carefully remove some pieces, and then we would
Hmm.
have people that came in with a wrecking ball and knocked some things down, and then we'd have other people.
Yeah,
So it requires all of these different unique approaches. However, it's essential that our white brothers and sisters, because we're all from the one, awaken to the things that they don't know and don't understand. But this goes
hmm,
back to what I said earlier. There's such a small group of people who are interested in doing the internal work of
yes,
awakening, of self
yes,
awareness, of self reflection, because we have to then deal with the ways that we showed up in areas where we might have shame now. We might
hmm,
have embarrassment now.
hmm,
But the key to our liberation and our transformation is through our shame, through our embarrassment, and the ownership of who we once were, and so that we can be who we are now.
mm. That's a great place to end. Chew on that, people. This is an episode. This is an episode I've been longing to have this kind of a conversation, and this is an episode that believe people should listen to over and over and over again because there's a lot. There's a lot of food here, a lot of nourishment that's been spoken here from you, Reverend Jason, and I really appreciate your consciousness. I really appreciate your compassion, and I really appreciate who you have come to be and your honoring of being exactly who you have come to be. People are so much in resistance of why they're here. They get afraid. They don't want to take that step, but you are stepping, and I watch you, and it's a beautiful thing to observe, and we need what you bring. The world
Thank you
needs
so
what you
much.
bring. And it doesn't matter that it's only a small percentage. A small percentage will change the world.
Absolutely. And it always has been a
Always
small group
has.
of
Mm-hmm.
people that set the world on fire. And
Yes.
I'm honored to be with you and your audience.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jason. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And is Agape coming back in person?
We don't have dates. It's going to
Mm.
happen at some point. But the one thing that Reverend Michael has said is he doesn't want to come back until we can be agape, right? So imagining trying to set up all these stations and have to align with the county orders
Yes.
is just not what he wants to do. Doesn't he and the board are in agreement that when we come back, we want to be able to be agape, and so we're
Mm-hmm.
that point where people are really energetic about coming together. So, it's going to happen at some point. We have no idea of a proposed date, but we're doing the work to prepare at some point, for our community to return in
It's all
person.
divine. It's all divine timing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all divine
Yes,
timing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
absolutely.
All
Bless you.
right.
Thank you.
Bless you.